So, first thing that I'd like to point out here is the domination dash, which occurred near the end of the first round. It's a little bit not great, because if it's blocked, it turns into a punish. Or at least that's what I would say, if it didn't just whiff, and then Aya wins the round anyway, because I guess Alice's 6A needed to be even farther for that to work. That felt like it really should have hit, but it didn't. I'm sure you've seen the previous video on strategies to do in Typhoon. Alice is one of those characters that has a lot of options in terms of using her doll, specifically her doll activation D22, to create a whole bunch of block stun and damage. We will see if she decides to do this. It seems like the doll activation did come out, however, it also seems like Aya was very good at avoiding it. Aya is electing not to go with a very offensive Typhoon, instead building meter and leveling up skill cards, which is perfectly fine, except it's probably something you want to do in Typhoon is to make sure and do those skill card level ups when you are not in immediate danger. In this case, Aya takes needless damage from the Sea Doll Laser while leveling up Tengu Fins. So now we've gone from Alice being very offensive and waiting and trying to use doll activation, and Aya just not doing anything, to Aya being offensive now that doll activation has been used. This is kind of like a bit of an ebb and flow of Typhoon. You'll see that sometimes, especially if you have an Alice with doll setups. Now, the other thing that did happen is that Alice tried to go for a 5B, or rather a 6B, at the very end of Typhoon. This is another strategy, is trying to get the first hit in after the weather's gone and you can actually be hit, and it'll do something. It didn't work, but that was the idea. Okay, so this is a Maple fan setup. What you do here is you do whatever buttons you're going to push. Aya does a really good job dashing out of that 6A. 6A, 6C into the 3 card. That is going to result in you only need one more orb left. You have to crush one more orb, which is probably going to take the place of a 2-3-6. And it didn't quite work. Short by like a quarter of an orb. And gets a crush anyway, so never mind. That was a pretty cheeky setup. EarlGray is actually quite good about using that default 2-2. There's a lot to learn from watching his Aya, actually. Using it as kind of like this delayed bullet, almost, because you can sit on that D22 for quite a while before you have to get off of it in some way or another. So using that, you can kind of get a little bit of a game of chicken going on with your opponent, and that's absolutely what EarlGray did here. Now, overall, this is definitely an instance of the Aya-Alice matchup being heavily in favor of Aya. The previous set was kind of a fluke, if I may. Ariri is just a very, very solid, strong player with a lot of fundamentals, and that alone can make up for a lot of matchup difficulties that you may have. So our next set is going to be Alice versus Marisa, and we are going to be seeing Ariri again. This is a very good play from Marisa. Now, what you want to do as Marisa in this situation is you want to kind of dodge into Alice's blind spot. Now, Ariri is very good about moving away when you move towards. However, Marisa was able to find that J5A and convert it into around 2k damage, which was very good. So this is something called a low profile. What we're going to see is Marisa use 6-6A and it dodge underneath Ariri's, Alice's J6A. When your hitbox goes underneath somebody else's hurt box, that's a low profile. This was actually quite risky from Marisa. So one thing that you can do when you're kind of in a little bit of a crunch If you're versus Alice, sometimes there will be a doll and she'll just block, and you know that you have a certain amount of time left. So that 2C didn't kill the doll. However, Marisa was able to get a crush at the same time as she was hit by that doll. So she was able to convert it anyway, because the doll's small amount of hit stun was not at any capacity close to the amount of hit stun that the crush had. This is a good example of Marisa's fastest J5A in the game being put to work. So even though she gets hit by the far 5A, Alice doesn't really know what can be done because Marisa can just J5A and hit the extended hurt box of J6A. So let's talk a little bit about this block string. So what we have here is the Alt 214,000 spear dolls being used to bide time for the C dolls to activate during the 3 card, which will result in approximately 4 and almost 5 orbs of spirit damage, in which instance Ariri decides to go for a 5B. Even though it's not totally safe, it's not tight, Marisa was terrified because she just got hit by a really long block string, so she just got crushed the rest of the way. That was a really good use of Spring Haze here. So Spring Haze means that you can dash forward and it will not result in you being hit by melees, however they will drain your spirit. In this instance, what Ariri did was he built up a couple of dolls and then just sat in front of Marisa and used 6-6A, which drained the rest of Marisa's spirit and resulted in Marisa being hit. And then Marisa uses a point-blank gravy beat for no reason. So all in all, this matchup, it seems close to 50-50. Alice isn't... It's not one of those matchups where Alice is just fighting for her life the entire time. It's more like they're both players and characters have tools to abuse, use, and you can kind of put yourself in situations that aren't great. With Alice, you know, there are a bunch of blind spots, but with Marisa, you also have a lot of punishable things that can result in some pretty hefty conversions by Alice. So all in all, kind of an even set, even though Ariri did win by a landslide. The character matchup isn't too terrible. Anyways, see you tomorrow with the next set.